The map was a lie. For a week they followed it until they realized it was a trap, leading them into an ocean desert. Water was running out. The crew was on the verge of mutiny. The captain looked not at the useless compass, but upward. His eyes held not despair, but calculation. He had another navigator, one that couldn't be burned or drowned, and today we'll crack its code. This navigator wasn't a device. It was firmware, embedded in the brain of an observant person who could read the operating system of nature itself. Maps were a huge problem. They were rare, expensive, often inaccurate, or deliberately falsified. Losing a map or compass in a storm was commonplace. That's why a pirate's real treasure was stored not in the hold, but in his head. It was the only insurance against perishing in the middle of the endless blue. A good portal-in chart on calfskin could cost a sailor's annual wages. The Dutch East India Company, or VOC, created entire departments dedicated to disinformation, releasing maps with fake reefs and non-existent islands to mislead competitors. Knowledge in the mind was like software that couldn't be stolen, unlike the hardware of maps and compasses. We will decipher the three main codes used by the mariners of the past. The first, the code of the heavens, the most reliable. The second, the code of the ocean, the most subtle. And the third, the code of life, the most unpredictable. Each could either save or kill. Think of it as a three-factor authentication system for finding land. The code of the heavens was your password. The code of the ocean, a text message confirmation. The code of life, a fingerprint. Only a match of all three provided certainty, and we'll start with what's shown for them, even on the darkest nights. Here is the Big Dipper. Draw a line through the two outer stars of its ladle, and you'll land on the North Star. It always points north with an error of less than a degree. This was their ironclad reference point. In the southern hemisphere, the Southern Cross played the same role. This is the foundation, the starting point for any captain. Sailors called the North Star Stella Maris, the star of the sea. Its deviation from true north is just 0.7 degrees. A clarification for the Southern Cross: it's not a single star, but a constellation. To find south, one had to extend its long axis about 4.5 times. It was less a pointer and more a celestial ruler. Stop for a second. Imagine your GPS was cut off. Right now, if you went outside tonight, you likely couldn't find the North Star. Not just see it, but be 100% sure it was the one. For us, it's a novelty. For them, it was a matter of survival. But what if the sky was clouded over for weeks? The Vikings solved this with sunstones, likely crystals of Iceland's spar. This crystal polarizes light, allowing them to pinpoint the sun's exact position even through thick clouds. It was their technology for bypassing celestial censorship. When the sky was silent, they read the ocean. They studied the waves. Not the ones the wind draws on the surface. That's just noise. They looked for the signal, the swell. Long, gentle waves born from storms thousands of miles away. The swell moves in one direction for hours, even days. These are invisible rails amid the chaos. An experienced sailor could hold a course simply by feeling the angle at which the swell struck the ship's hull. It's like listening to music in a crowded tavern. A novice hears only the din. A master catches the deep, unchanging rhythm of the bass. The swell was the ocean's bass line. The Polynesians perfected this art. They would lie on the bottom of their canoes to feel the slightest changes in the water's movement with their backs, allowing them to find tiny islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Caribbean pirates, learning from the locals, adopted this knowledge. They turned their ship into a single, sensitive ear. The people of the Marshall Islands even had navigational stick charts made of sticks and shells. These charts depicted not land, but the patterns of ocean swell and its refraction around islands. It was a physical diagram of invisible forces. The second sign was color. A deep, almost violet indigo meant one thing. An abyss lay beneath the keel, with little life. But as soon as it changed to a greenish or murky hue, it was a signal. Rivers carry silt into the ocean, and shallows stir up sand from the bottom. A green tint indicated phytoplankton, which thrives in coastal zones. For a pirate, a change in watercolor was louder than a cry of "Land ho!" from the mast. At night, the water offered an even brighter sign. In plankton-rich waters, the ship's wake would begin to glow with a cold fire. This phenomenon, known as a milky sea, was an unmistakable marker that they had left the biological desert of the open ocean. Imagine yourself as a lookout. Your job is not to search for land, but for a line, a sharp boundary where deep blue water meets turquoise. This could be a current, like the Gulf Stream, or the edge of an underwater plateau. Crossing such a line was like passing a road sign in the middle of a desert. The edge of the Gulf Stream is so sharp that sailors called it the cold wall. The water temperature could change by 10 degrees Celsius over a few hundred meters. It was not just a visual, but a tactile change. The ship was literally entering a different river in the middle of the ocean. But the ocean could lie. A false current or a huge mass of seaweed could offer false hope. Atmospheric refraction created mirages of non-existent shores on the horizon. The ocean was like a doctor describing symptoms. One symptom, like watercolor, could mean anything. A consensus of several signs was needed to make a correct diagnosis. That's why the most reliable signs weren't drawn by water or stars. They were alive. And at sunset, they always returned home. The key was not the birds themselves, but their behavior. Gannets, frigate birds, terns, these species roost on land. If you see a flock flying away from the ship in the morning, you know the general direction of land. But the main signal came in the evening. When these same birds fly confidently in one direction at sunset, they are heading home. This was the most accurate natural compass, pointing to the nearest island. The frigate bird had one killer secret. Its feathers are not waterproof. It cannot land on water. Unlike an albatross, it is physically obligated to return to land by nightfall. Spotting a frigate bird was an almost certain guarantee of land within 100 miles. It was the evening rush hour. Everyone was flying from the office, the sea, to the suburbs, the island. Pirates were reluctant ornithologists. They knew if you saw an albatross, land could be thousands of miles away. But if you saw a gull, or especially a cormorant, land was no more than a day's journey. They distinguished between birds that could sleep on the water and those that desperately needed land for the night. This knowledge was their ruler for measuring distance. It's like determining proximity to a city by the strength of your cell signal. An albatross, no service. A gull, a solid 2 or 3 bars. A cormorant, connected to home Wi-Fi. The same applied to marine life. Schools of certain fish, sea turtles, and even snakes often stay in coastal waters. Encountering them in the open ocean was a sure sign that land or a large reef was nearby. The most reliable non-living signs were floating coconuts, palm fronds, or tree trunks. If these debris still had land-based insects on them or weren't heavily encrusted with barnacles, it meant land was not just close, but within a few miles. Let's introduce a pirate's trust scale. The North Star, 10 out of 10. A flock of gannets flying at sunset, 8 out of 10. The color of the water, 6 out of 10. A lone bird at noon, just 3 out of 10, as it could simply be lost. This wasn't an exact science, but a constant process of collecting and analyzing data. The captain was not just a cutthroat, but an analyst, weighing probabilities where the lives of the entire crew were at stake. In essence, he was intuitively using Bayesian inference, a method of updating beliefs. Based on new evidence, each new sign updated his mental map of probabilities. He was like a modern data scientist whose model predicted not clicks, but survival. They looked at the sky, the water, the animals, but sometimes the surest sign of land couldn't be seen. It could only be smelled. After a long storm, when the wind blew from the land, it carried scents with it, damp earth, decaying vegetation, the smoke from fires. An experienced nose could catch this smell of land from dozens of miles away. We have a built-in biological superpower for this. We are hypersensitive to geosmin, a substance produced by soil bacteria. This is what gives soil its characteristic scent after rain. We can detect it at a concentration of 5 parts per trillion. Christopher Columbus repeatedly wrote in his journals that his crew smelled land several days before they saw it. They looked for other signs in the air. Even on a clear day, stationary clouds often hung over islands. Land heats up faster than water, causing warm air to rise and moisture to condense. A sailor seeing a lone stationary cloud on the horizon among other moving ones understood that land was beneath it. This phenomenon is called orographic lift. The island acts like an underwater mountain, forcing the airflow upward. The cloud was a visible ripple in this air river, precisely indicating the invisible obstacle. Pilots in the Pacific still use this method today. An even more subtle sign was the color of the cloud base. Clouds acted as a screen, reflecting what was below them. Over a turquoise lagoon, they took on a greenish hue. Over dark land, a grayish one. The most striking example of this effect was ice blink. In polar regions, whalers could distinguish the dark reflection of open water from the bright white reflection of ice fields from dozens of miles away. Misreading this celestial screen could trap a ship in the ice and cost lives. All these methods seem ingenious, but they also created the most dangerous illusions. One misinterpreted sign, one false hope, and a ship would head not to salvation, but onto sharp reefs. This is what happened to the Dutch ship Batavia in 1629. The captain was convinced he was far from the Australian coast. He misinterpreted the signs, the birds and seaweed, and crashed into reefs at full speed during the night. It's a perfect example of how confidence based on signs could lead to disaster. The biggest mistake was to blindly trust birds. Shearwaters, for example, could spend months at sea, flying hundreds of miles from land, and a flock of birds might be flying not toward an island, but toward a massive school of fish. A captain who bet on such a flock would lead his ship to nowhere, losing precious time and water. You don't follow a single car leaving a parking lot. You look for the overall flow of traffic heading to the highway. Clouds on the horizon were a classic trap. The cruelest deception was the Fata Morgana, a complex optical effect capable of painting castles, cliffs, or an entire coastline on the horizon. A crew tormented by thirst saw what it wanted to see. Huge masses of seaweed, like in the Sargasso Sea, created the illusion of land and changed the water's color. Sailors called it the graveyard of ships. It was a psychological war where the main enemy was despair. Imagine you are the captain. 2 weeks at sea, water is nearly gone. To your left, a cloud that looks like an island. To your right, a flock of birds flying in another direction. Both signals could be false. You have one chance. Your decision will determine whether your crew lives or dies of thirst. These signs did not exist in a vacuum. They were used to correct dead reckoning, the primary method of calculating position based on course, speed, and time. The signs were a way to check how far your calculations had drifted. It wasn't a choice between intuition and calculation. It was calculation corrected by intuition. So how did they avoid mistakes? The main rule was to never trust a single sign. True mastery lay in synthesis. If you see birds flying at sunset, and the watercolor is changing, and you feel the swell reflecting off a shore, then you can be confident. They weren't looking for a signal, but for a convergence of 3 or 4 signals. The Polynesians took this idea to a genius level. They aimed not for a specific island, but for an island screen, an entire archipelago. They deliberately set a course slightly upwind. Even if they missed their main target, they would run into the network of signs from neighboring islands, allowing them to find land. So how do you turn this chaos of signs into a working system? Here's a simplified survival protocol. Step 1. Macro orientation. At night, you find the North Star or the Southern Cross. This is your main vector. By day, the sun. To determine east and west, they used a simple sun compass. They would stick a knife into the deck. Mark the tip of the shadow in the morning. Wait a few hours, mark it again. The line connecting the 2 points ran exactly west to east. Step 2. Micro-correction. You read the swell. It holds your course when the sky is silent. If the stars are your highway, the swell is staying in your lane. Step 3. Search mode. When you believe land is near, all attention shifts to living indicators. Birds flying home at sunset, the color of the water, clouds on the horizon. You inhale the air, searching for the scent of land. This is your precision guidance system. But there was a final, most reliable test, the sounding lead. A lead weight on a rope. Its bottom was hollowed out and filled with tallow. When the lead hit the bottom, a sample of the seabed, sand, silt, shells, would stick to the tallow. This wasn't just measuring depth, it was literally touching the unseen land, providing 100% confirmation of its proximity in nature. This was not superstition. It was the art of total awareness. Ancient mariners were connected to the world on a level we have completely lost. They didn't just look at the ocean, they listened to it, smelled it, and felt it. In the 1960s, explorer David Lewis proved this. On his yacht, he sailed the routes of the Polynesians, using only their methods, and confirmed their scientific accuracy. We interact with the world through the graphical interface of GPS. They read the command line of reality itself. What is more awe-inspiring? The ingenious observance that allowed them to read nature like a book, or the desperate courage it took to bet their lives on these signs? Write just one word in the comments: observance or courage. Although perhaps the most important thing was neither. It was leadership. The captain's ability to convince 100 superstitious cutthroats to believe his interpretation of a bird's flight. After all, the most brilliant navigator was useless if the crew didn't believe him.